far too often found this with a lot of other practitioners. We look at the issue and you're kind of trying to jump ahead to the finish line, and you end up missing a number of things along the way that could have gotten you there, better, more efficiently. And the problem that you're looking at isn't just one problem. It is a series of smaller problems that you can break down and address individually to get you to that end goal. Get people together with a common goal and a common mission, and miraculous things can happen.
Hi there, and welcome back to the BeyondProduct podcast. I'm your host, Moshe Mikanovsky, and in this podcast, we're diving deep into what goes into making a truly successful and impactful digital product. We're exploring the unspoken and behind the scenes and everything beyond the surface of product development. It all begins with the problem statement, doesn't it? And today, we have a fascinating guest with us. This individual encountered a significant challenge at work. When he couldn't find an existing software solution to address it, he took matters into his own hands. He rolled up his sleeves, learned software development, and created the product solution from scratch. Please give a warm welcome to Chris Moffatt Armes, the founder of PolitraQ, an all-in-one advocacy management platform designed for government relationship professionals. Chris, we're thrilled to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Perfect. It's a pleasure to have you. Tell us about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm the founder of PolitraQ. I'm a self-taught developer, and I would really say I'm an accidental entrepreneur. Always had a lot of interest in technology and in the entrepreneurship space, but didn't really see how I could bridge that interest into actually playing a part in the space. I did my undergraduate and graduate degrees in political science, and worked in government and in politics for a number of years. Mm-hmm. Bounced around through a number of different campaigns and other roles before winding up at Queen's University in Kingston. While I was working at Queen's, that I moved into the government relations space and found myself looking for a solution to a problem that we were experiencing. We tried a few off-the-shelf options, didn't really like them. And I said, you know what? I know the problem. Let me see if I can figure out the solution. And several years later, we're here with PolitraQ.
That's an amazing story, and we'll dive into it a bit more. But you started, I saw in your profile, you started as helping other candidates in politics, different political campaigns, help them to be run, etc. And I know it's a lot of work. I know it's a very demanded work there. And then you moved into this industry of government relationship with at the university. So tell us how did you move throughout that career?
It's funny. On the surface, it doesn't seem like there'd be a lot of overlap between them. But I do remember in one case being on a campaign and looking at one of my buddies. It's about 2:00 in the morning. We were doing data entry. And I looked at him and said, you realize there's another group of young guys about our age in a similarly small, stinky room doing, similar business, but they're starting the next Google and they're going to be rich. He's like, yeah, we made the really, really bad life choices. But in a lot of ways, there is a lot of overlap there. Campaigns are much less structured than you'd imagine. It's, a lot of flying by the seat of your pants, figuring things out as you go. And very much like in entrepreneurship, there's a lot of work without necessarily the guarantee of some sort of result or some sort of positive outcome at the end. And so you get used to, taking bets on yourself and saying, if we're successful in this campaign, that'll get me to Queen's Park. And from there, I can go on to everywhere else I want to go. And in a lot of ways, it was a similar kind of mindset coming into the job itself.
That parallel that you made between running candidacy and being an entrepreneur is very intriguing to me. Can you dive a bit more into that? Where do you see those parallels?
I think it's mostly in two ways. First of all, as I said, there's that, you're putting in a lot of effort up front without necessarily being guaranteed any sort of outcome on the other end. And so as a result, you're forced to move fast and break things. And you're forced to learn and to stretch outside of your comfort zone. And I think those would kind of be the traits and the characteristics that I think carry over the best from those environments. it's also, campaigns, you'll get a very interesting collection of people working on a campaign. There's,
Absolutely.
your poli-sci undergrads, and then there's, the campus, group for whichever party. Then there's, the locals from the community. And you have these folks with wildly different backgrounds and wildly different experience, all working towards a common goal. And it doesn't take, foosball tables and all the stuff that you imagine, from the tech space. It's get people together with a common goal and a common mission, and miraculous things can happen. And that's really, I saw that a number of times on campaigns and every day working for PolitraQ.
Yeah, I guess one of the things that is not the same is that the campaign ends, so either you win or you lose.
Yes.
Where
Yes.
with entrepreneurship, you just continue and you pivot and you try different things. Have you seen that already in your journey?
I wouldn't say we've made, necessarily full pivots, but absolutely, there have been things that I thought were going to go one way, or features that I thought, would be essential or that folks would really want, because in my mind, from being a practitioner, that was what I was thinking. But that's really only an N of one example, and learning, how much more I needed to learn from others in the industry, because in addition to, again, just one perspective. It was one perspective working in one particular environment of government relations, and really seeing how, there's a lot that's very similar, and then there are a lot of very subtle differences, and being able to identify, what those are, and what the concerns are, is key.
Yeah. So let's talk a bit about what is government relations, because that's something that I wasn't really familiar with until recently when I met you and your peers at PolitraQ. Um, but I know PR, public relations, and I know, maybe human relations. What does government relations means to an organization like a university?
Really, government relations is really, the best way to think of it is very, very, very specific and targeted PR. There's a perception of government relations, and a lot of folks will have heard of the term lobbying. And lobbying tends to have a bit of a negative viewpoint, a negative connotation. And it was earned, admittedly, it was well earned in the past, but stricter and stricter regulations have been brought in, particularly here in Canada, where the things that it's presumed that we're doing, we're not in there handing over large chunks of money. You're going in and trying to come up with a persuasive argument as to why it is in your favor as well as the elected officials' favor to do or not do whatever it is that you're looking for.
Okay.
So it's being able to understand not just, the other person on the other side of the table, but what's actually motivating them, what other voices are going to be, competing with yours for their attention, and how do you persuade them that the thing that is best for you is also going to benefit them, their core constituencies, their parties, and their chance at reelection.
Now I get it much better. Thank you for that. So you had that problem, and that's really what intrigued me about how you started PolitraQ. Tell us, how did you, what did you try first to do before you decided I'm going to learn software development and build it?
Yeah, absolutely. So like a lot of other practitioners, we didn't have a real formalized way of keeping track of everything that we were producing. And that goes beyond just meeting notes and records and whatnot, but into like the specifics of the files that we were working on. And I tried a couple of the more traditional sales type CRMs, the names that you would expect, and they're great at what they do. But the problem is when you're trying to use them in an environment they're not built for. In government relations, A, we'd be handling multiple issues in a particular touch point.
Mm-hmm.
B, we don't always know who's going to be across the table until we actually get there for the meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And C, unlike in sales where you have your initial touch point and you have your discovery call, then you qualify them, you have your pitch, etc., there isn't quite that same distinct pathway from discovering that an issue exists that's going to impact your organization and being able to raise it and address it and present solutions to government.
Mm-hmm.
And so I found there was a lot of friction trying to make it fit in that model. And so, looked south of the border, tried a couple platforms designed for the American context that were priced for the American context, and really just there was still that there was that missing factor. It didn't capture what I was hoping to capture, and I knew what we needed, so it just kind of made sense to figure it out.
So I'm sure that every different country has its own, not just regulations and how their governments are actually putting the data out there, but also little things you really have to know in order to make that relationship work. So was that also something that you figured it doesn't fit in the models from those systems from the US?
Yeah, so it was obviously the very different context, and they had a lot of really great integrated tracking features that we weren't lobbying south of the border, so I didn't need to know which committees were sitting on Capitol Hill that week because it didn't impact me in the slightest.
Right.
Uh, and then when you ask them about Canadian data, they're like, "Well, that's the Canadian market." Yes, that's the market that I'm hoping to address here,
Right.
man. So,
Right.
and I also I'm very I like to maintain structure. I don't like knowing that I know something but not knowing where that piece of information is or know it. So I wanted to take it beyond just like the CRM style tool, and I wanted to have that integrated intelligence component on top of it because I hate going into a meeting and if only I had known that, oh, yes, their son is a third year at Queens, or, oh, they have this connection to the issue that they worked in that sector. That sort of information can be crucial when you only have, that half hour with the member in order to get your message across. Knowing how to break down those divides and to get that information across, you need to know what you have. And I wanted something that would be able to provide that.
Yeah, and I've seen in the demo, it's actually pretty cool because you do have all the information about the Canadian governments from all the different levels, municipal, provincial, and federal.
Mhm.
And that seems like amazing just in the tip of your fingers to get that information. So how did you get that information? Is it integrations?
So a lot of it is publicly available, and from there we just built an extensive network to collect that information, format it in a way that made sense for what we were doing with it. Because it wasn't that was the other thing. I didn't just want to provide my users with that information. I wanted to give it to them in the context that I thought they were most likely to use it.
Right.
So it's one thing to hand someone a copy of, we call them the Hansard. It's the transcripts of what took place in the legislature. It's one thing to hand someone the Hansard. It's another thing to be able to break it down into all of the mentions of the issues that they're following, and then to layer that on top of whatever else they've put in so that at a glance they have all of their messaging, all of their background, and then they can see everything else that's been discussed around that topic.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. That's really interesting, and something you said that triggered me there in a good way, actually, is 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 how you wanted it to give the information to them in the right place. Now, you started with having this problem, so you were the first persona or the first person fitting that persona. In product management, we're always looking at how do I actually discover that this is really what is going to work for your users. Have you seen that all your users are actually very similar to your persona? So what was fitting you is also fitting them? Or did you find that also new personas and things like that?
Yeah, so there was definitely a little bit of both. Take a step back for a second. In government relations, there's really two practice types. You can be what's called an in-house practitioner, which means you're employed by the organization you represent. Your incentive structure and your oversight structure is usually to a president or to your board. And they want to see that you understand the issues that the organization as a whole is experiencing, that you're able to communicate those to government, and that you're able to identify issues before they become issues. The flip side is consultant lobbyists. Now, I had never worked as a consultant lobbyist, and so it was a bit of a black hole to me. And from there, it was a matter of really just being open with my customers, particularly in the early days, and saying, yes, this is, you're going to be, a single digit, customer number here.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't want you to just see this as an early stage product. I want you to see yourself as being able to steer and to guide the direction of the platform, and
Perfect.
really, leaning on their insights and their expertise and their feedback, in order to drive new feature development, to drive additions in terms of data that we were tracking. It was really just, they're going to tell you, they know what they need because they've been having to track it manually. Listen, figure out what you need to do to give it to them, and they'll be happy.
Listen, you didn't only learn software development, you also learned product management. So that's exactly what the product management will do. So I kudos for that. How was it to learn all of that? I mean, how does someone that comes from political background and doing the government relationships, all of a sudden, you want to build your own software and you learn how to develop software, being a software developer and a product manager?
If I had known at the time how difficult it was going to be, I probably would have been a little bit, less hubristic when I said, "Yeah, I can build that." It was absolutely a challenge. It's a very different mindset and a very different approach to approaching problems. That being said, I found during the period where I was still working as a lobbyist and working on PolitraQ, I found there was kind of trickle down and crossover benefits from having learned, development and then applying that in the political space. And one example I'll give you is, my boss came to me one time and said, "We got a meeting with one of the critics. We know he has a kid that goes here, but we don't know the kid's name. Can you find him?" Now, the institution that I worked for had like 26 or 27,000 full time students. So, right off the bat, you look at that and go, all right, that's looking for a needle in a stack of needles.
Yes.
But from all the time that I had spent working on the platform, I realized, I'm like, all right, I know more than just that he has this kid here. I know, for example, that this particular individual has a doctorate degree. And I know that doctorate degrees or not doctorate, but doctorate dissertations are available through our library. And
Mhm.
almost all of the time, they'll mention their family members in the early pages. So I
Okay.
went through, found their dissertation, found the kid's name, went through their volunteer page, went through a couple other things, and found out who this person was. Which you do have to be careful because it's very easy to become creepy. But in understanding that you have more information than you think, and the problem that you're looking at isn't just one problem. It is a series of smaller problems that you can break down and address individually to get you to that end goal.
Ah,
Far too often before, at least before, and I found this with a lot of other practitioners, we look at the issue and you're kind of trying to jump ahead to the finish line,
yeah.
and you end up missing a number of things along the way that could have gotten you there, better, more efficiently, made a stronger argument in your favor. And so I really did find there was a lot of carryover and a benefit from learning development.
Yeah, I love what you said over there about breaking down to smaller problems and then deal with
Yeah.
each problem on its own, and then it's much more manageable.
Hmm.
So when you wanted to take it from just using it for your own work to, okay, I can do something with that, make it into a SaaS product and sell it to others, how did you validate that people are going to pay for something like that?
Yeah. So when I built it initially, I had no intention of this being a product that I was going to sell. It was, I had an issue, I needed to solve it. I figured out how to do that. And I just kind of mentioned it in passing to a colleague at another university, and they're like, "Oh, can we get on that?" And so as soon as I heard that, I'm like, "All right." Literally booked a call with our VP of Research and Innovation.
Yeah.
Confirmed that I owned the IP for it because I built it, yes, while working there, but I built it, on my own time.
Hmm.
And so I just put a post out on my LinkedIn page and said, like, "Hey, colleagues in this industry, are you interested?"
Uh-huh.
And I posted that before heading to an event. I got to the event and I had 10 emails back. I'm like, all right, there's something here.
Nice. Hmm.
And yes, it's been a long, slow road to grow it from there. But
Hmm.
it's as soon as there was that first signal, it's like, all right, that's enough.
Hmm.
Let's do this. Let's see what comes of it.
And they're
I
also willing
also
to pay. They say they're willing to pay for something like
They
that.
were willing to pay for it. And when I decided I was going to finally roll it out, I said, all right, the goal is we're going to launch this. It wasn't, let's get, X number of paying customers, or I want to be out of my job by X amount. Let's launch it. That launching it, making it public, that was the victory. And that means that everything since then has been gravy. And, it's that additional, because the challenge was getting it to launch. Once you launched it, and it's like, all right, now this thing's out there. Let's see what we can do with it.
Yeah. I would think one of the challenges would be, for example, making it a multi-tenant. So yes. You only see your information, they only see their information.
Yeah, we've now probably done, 3 full platform rewrites at this point. That's the downside of building the airplane while it's in the air. You end up with, 7 wings, 3 engines, and none of them are pointing in the same direction. So, being able to take a step back, kind of fix all that tech debt and get it back to a more manageable place. It's the 3rd iteration, but I'd say we're finally on the one that I'm not embarrassed by.
Yeah. So what do you think is more important, going to the market first or making the product perfect?
Definitely going to market first. If I had waited until I was, like I said, if I had waited until I wasn't embarrassed, I would have launched this past April. It takes a long time. And when you know that there's a market there, especially, and if you're honest with the customer as well, and they know that this is an early stage product, I was worried, a number of times that was going to be a pushback issue.
Right.
But in a lot of ways, it was a benefit because they saw it as a chance to really shape the direction. If you get those real kind of early advocates, they're making, tons of recommendations and introductions. Like word of mouth has been huge for us. Because as soon as someone found the solution, they're like, all right, we got to tell other people. And yeah.
They fall in love with it.
But absolutely. Making sure that there's the market there first, because you don't want to spend all that time building something that nobody wants.
Absolutely. I told you before, you learned how to be a product manager. So that's awesome. If you ever want to have a career shift into that, then you already done that. So
I think I've made my career shift for this decade.
I'm sure. Being a founder, and are you the CEO of the company?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So if you will have to give tips to other founders, how do you take that plunge, putting it out there, even if you know it's not perfect?
So I'm sure this is probably either a Paul Graham or someone else, but I saw it was like a little graphic where it's like what people think the minimum viable product is, and it was like a car up on cinder blocks, and I was like, what it actually is, and it's a bicycle.
Yes.
And it's like understanding like the first thing is what is the problem you are trying to solve. There's a lot of wonderful, great features that you can add to it, but what are you trying to solve up front? Mm-hmm. And the first version of my platform was a very, very basic engagement tracker. It was not, it didn't have all the other, legislative monitoring and media monitoring and all of that. Mm-hmm. I knew I wanted to have that, but it was kind of like, I knew I wanted it. I don't even yet know if my customers want it to the same extent that I want it.
Right.
But I know that they at least want this feature set. So let's give them that feature set and then get them using it. See, is it working the way that I expected it to, or that I, having built it, know that, figure all that stuff out and then figure out what else you can add into it, what else you can build on, make a really, really nice bike first and then get them into a supercar down the road. And they're going to be a lot more open to the type of feedback and the type of input that you can get if you're open and honest with them that they're getting a bicycle to start. The goal is to build this into a race car, instead of just getting them a Taurus that's up on blocks.
Yeah. And that initial interest that you saw from your peers, they had the same problems that you had. And you already were using it yourself. So you got to know that, yes, this is solving this problem. So, just the bells and whistles around it or make it pretty doesn't mean that they will not get value from it already.
Yeah. Now, that being said, like you should still try to make it look good, try to make it work. If they're getting error messages more often than they're getting the data, that's not a minimum viable product because it's not viable. Like the V is the most important word in that. Like it has to at least solve one of their pain points, and then you can address the others as you go.
Yeah, yeah. So after you started having clients, and you told us that you went through several iterations, you got feedback from them. How did you make sure that whatever feedback you get from them is still in line with your vision and whatever you apply?
Yeah, so I mean, we did get some feedback early on that would have, I think, taken us in different directions in terms of wanting to be able to track grant applications and donor relations and stuff that yes is kind of tangential to the core use of the platform.
Mm-hmm.
And what we tried to do is a ensure that we know who we are and what we're trying to do with the platform. And B, recognize that when folks are saying, yes, we'd like this, which is a 90 degree from what you're currently working on, that when we get to the size that we have enough resources underneath, that is a potential other product that we could
Mm-hmm.
offer down the road as well.
Mm.
So I never I never really worried too much when I got feedback that didn't really fit within the vision for the product, because I went, all right, that's another product we can build down the road.
Okay.
And in most cases, the feedback we were getting was on approaches rather than necessarily tools that were desired, or like minor things like that. But
Mm-hmm.
then again, we would get some requests that's like, oh yeah, that actually would be really useful for everyone. Let's just do that.
Mm-hmm.
And really just trying to, as long as you know what you are and what you're trying to accomplish,
Mm-hmm.
feedback that serves in getting you closer to that, you're going to take and you're going to absorb, and feedback that doesn't, you'll address either by addressing it down the road
Mm-hmm.
or by thanking them for that impact, that feedback, and trying to help them find another tool that will do that for them.
Right, I see. Let me ask you about, how do you navigate or balance between your user research and your intuition? Which one are you going to choose?
I would choose user research as
Mhm.
long as there is enough detail in the feedback that they're giving that you can tell that this is something that's well thought out rather
Mhm.
than an utterance. If someone says, I want to be able to do this,
Mhm.
that's cool.
Mhm.
If they say, I'd like to be able to do this because I think it would work really well here, and I could, and I've been very lucky so far that the customers that we've brought on, when they're coming to me with requests, or when they're coming to me with feature recommendations, they've given it that sort of thought because they've already recognized all the ways that it would be useful to them,
Mhm.
and they're able to communicate that clearly in a way that go, yeah, you know what, that would make sense,
Yeah.
and we look at how to do it from there. There have been some great ones that are kind of beyond my technical ability, or
Mhm.
whatnot at this point, and I'm honest with them. It's like, yeah, that's something that we can look at, though it, excuse me, may be a little bit further down the road.
Mm. So it's
So I mean,
basically more. It's basically more leaning towards the customer feedback, but there is some intuition there that you have to apply.
yeah, I think it's
Mhm.
the intuition forms kind of the guide rails that keep you within the domain of the product and the vision that you've set out for,
Right.
and then the feedback kind of helps you course correct along that road.
Okay, perfect. Now, I want to switch over maybe to your founder journey about raising funds. How did you go to do that?
It took a long time. Part of the reason I partnered up with my business partner Joel is because he had a background in that domain,
Hmm.
and I realized, like, I'm already kind of stretching into a domain that I didn't have a formal education in, or have decades of experience in, and so raising funds and understanding the market side of that is itself a whole different skill set, that when you're already trying to learn one new skill set and master one new skill set,
Right.
does it make sense to try and master it myself, or does it make sense to find someone who has that experience and bring them on board?
Mm-hmm.
I look at the folks that we've hired as the reason I'm bringing you in is because you're better at this than me. I don't want to be the best developer or the best fundraiser or whatever in the company. I want to make sure that we're able to hire and identify those folks in order to move the company forward.
That's another great tip for founders. And you learned it on your own when you learned how to develop, and you saw how hard it is to do that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'm already building one airplane on the way down. I don't, fundraising is its own. So, of course, I went and did some pitching. I, was connected with a local angel network here in Kingston, and it got, you get your war wounds. It was an experience, but of course, those are things that teach you so that when you are in the place where you're ready to raise, and you are in the place where it makes sense, that you understand a little bit more about the environment you're walking into and can be ready for it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And bringing the right person to do that is also really important. When I met Joel, he told me the story about how there was a bit of disbelief that you can actually raise funds, and then he was able to prove you wrong. So that's a great story.
Yeah, I mean, I had kind of made peace with, all right, maybe this is going to have to be, a bootstrapped, indie hacker type product where funding isn't in the cards. And, there's a lot of great businesses. Something like 97 or 98% of businesses will never raise funding from outside. And so recognizing that, I'm like, all right, it's not going to be fun. It's going to be less fun. It's going to be much harder, but there is a path forward that way. And so I think, part of it was just recognizing that there are going to be different routes you're going to have to take, and identifying, if I go down this route, what does success look like? If I go down this route, how does that differ from, from route A in terms of a success or a failure? And so, when Joel came on board and, he was able to, like, some of it just came down to, I didn't know the lingo. And so I thought I was saying one thing, and it turned out I was saying something completely different, because when, but those are the things you only learn either through experience or through someone else's experience that you're able to leverage.
Yeah. So now that you have seen it, and in retrospect, would you have done things differently, or would you suggest other founders what else to do in order to be more successful?
So, I mean, when we launched the platform, it was self-funded, which means right off the bat, your number one concern is, how do I ensure that this is providing enough value that someone is going to open up their wallet, pull out their credit card, and cover my server costs?
Right.
And it cuts down a lot of the distractions that come around with, trying to become an entrepreneur or entering, starting your own business. You read a blog article from folks and they're like, oh, we had to incorporate, and then we had to hire a designer to come up with our look. I picked out a font pairing and a color palette from, a couple Instagram pages that did graphic design and would put together and that's how the PolitraQ look and feel came together. You focus on the things that are going to actually deliver return rather than the things that feel like you're playing entrepreneur.
I see. So how do you distinguish between the two? Sometimes, you like trying so many different things. I know it on myself. So how do you distinguish between what will create that real value versus what is just cosmetics, or, like you said, plain an entrepreneur?
I think it does come down to just being honest with yourself, because at the end of the day, like, we've all had those days. Maybe not now when you're running your own business, but you've had those days you go into the office and you're not really putting in the effort that you would expect. It's maybe the holidays are coming up, or you're kind of zoned out, whatever it may be. But deep down that you're not doing what you should do, and you can feel that. And I kind of felt the same way when it came to, figuring out what were the essential things that, would allow me to launch this and allow, individuals and companies to buy it. What are the things that I really want to be able to do with this? And I think my customers would like as well. And then what are the things that I want to do that literally no one other than me will notice and or care? And then just kind of, group it into one of those three categories. And when the first bucket, the essential stuff, is all done, and you can work on all the nice to haves, that you want.
Yeah.
But make sure that you get the other stuff out of the way. And when you want, like, campaign, going back to the start of our conversation, it's something you learn on campaigns. You don't have a lot of money. You don't have a lot of time. So yeah, it would be really great to get someone in to film a commercial and take 8 hours out of the candidate's day. But 8 hours out of their day is like 1,000 doors that you could be knocking, or 2 events that you could attend where you're going to meet, X. There's all sorts of better ways that you could be spending the time, and then just identify those and do them instead.
I love how laser focused you are on these things, and really being able to prioritize what needs to be done based on those outcomes of creating a value. So this is really, all of this is great tips for anyone out there.
Actually, I went full-time with PolitraQ 2 weeks before my son was born.
Oh, wow. You have twins.
Yeah, essentially, yeah. So the thing I like the most, when I can see that the product is resonating with someone, when I, go to push an update and I can watch the server logs. And I've done it on a few occasions where I've sat there for a minute and just kind of watched, and you see all this traffic going through. And you realize, like, that is people that are seeing value in the product that they are choosing to pay you for, and they are getting use out of it. It means that there's something that they're getting out of this that they're able to justify that. Like, that's an incredible feeling.